Lanterns over the Perfume River. Chapter 1. Silk and Smoke. It was the month when the moon hung like a silver coin over the Perfume River, and the lantern sellers tied crimson cords around their wrists for luck. Huế breathed incense and rain. At dawn, the river lay still as silk unwound across a loom, and at noon the clouds gathered and broke themselves into veils that drifted over tile roofs and the mango trees inside the walls of the imperial city. By evening, the markets quickened silk vendors, unfurling bolts that shone like fish scales, bronze bell founders ringing their wares with small hammers, boys with trays of sesame candy calling, "Kao Maison," sweet as the emperor's dreams. Lan rose before her father, before her younger brothers, before even the rooster that dozed on the bamboo rung near the door. She liked the unclaimed hush, the small, sleepy clucks of the hens, the breath of the house before it woke. She knelt by the side door to the workshop and lifted the reed mat that protected against damp. Beneath it lay the dyed skeins she and her aunt had hung the night before, indigo deep as well water, a gold made from the flowers that grew along the ridge, and a red, her favorite, pressed from cochineal that stained her fingers like pomegranate seeds. She pinched a strand and felt it yield, soft, tight, the twist correct. When the silk was right, it gave beneath the skin almost like the throat of a bird. "Conde some quoi, Lan," her father murmured behind her. "You woke too early." His voice was a thread pulled through the edge of sleep. He stood with his hair rucked on one side, his palms smoothing the air as if taming another unruly strand. "We have the order for Madame Fung's daughter's wedding skirt," she said without turning. "And Master Lu expects the peonies on his festival robe to have extra sheen." She dared a tiny smile. "It is not I who woke early. It is the silk that calls." 10. Her father laughed, a quick, throaty sound, then cleared his throat when the rooster finally startled awake and crowed in protest. "The silk calls, and you come running," he said. But she saw the pride shining from his eyes. It had been there since she was 10, and had matched 2 weft threads so perfectly that the seam was invisible since she was 13, and could tell the difference between the gloss of cocoon from the southern groves and that of the hills by smell alone, since she was 16, and could copy the old imperial phoenix with a hand steady as a calligrapher's. She had passed 19 2 months before, and already she had stitched the wedding skirts for 5 brides within the city walls and 2 beyond. She knew where to place the fish so its eye would catch the light at the bride's first step forward, where to add a petal to draw a stranger's gaze. But the silk she loved best was the kind that shimmered when no one looked, the secret sheen only the wearer would feel against her skin. Outside, the lane by their house was waking. A woman with a child bound to her back shuffled past, a basket of lotus bulbs on her head. The child's palm opened and shut as if kneading dough. A boy on a bamboo bicycle rattled along, his feet bare and blackened by dust, and behind him the conical hat of a nun swayed like a small bell. Somewhere a temple drum, somewhere the faint bugle from the garrison. Lan rose and tied her hair with a strip of undyed silk, then washed her hands with the rainwater her mother had collected in the earthen jar. She missed her mother most in the mornings. The jar was the last thing her mother's hands had tended. 3 years had passed since the fever, but grief, like silk, had a memory. Press it hard, and the crease remained. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and pulled open the workshop's doors. Her aunt already sat at the big loom, as broad as a bed, her bare feet poised on the pedals. "They sent word," Aunt Thu said without greeting, the way those who share lives share sentences as well. The mandarin's household expects their robe by the Mid-Autumn Festival. That is soon, Lan said. Soon is another way of saying, we will do what we would have done already, Aunt Thu said, and thumped the beam with her palm. She was not unkind, only pragmatic. Her forehead had the deep line women developed after years of thinking how to afford small luxuries and how to salvage pride. Lift the heddle. We begin with the cloud border. Lan slid onto her bench and took up the shuttle. The loom had belonged to her grandmother before it belonged to her aunt, and when she was little, the loom's wooden belly had seemed like the hull of an upturned boat. She had once lay beneath it pretending she was at sea. Now the loom creaked and sang as she fed it, the warp threads quivering like taut river grass. There was the gait of the loom that was like breath, and there was the tight, desperate tread that was like fear. Today, as on most days, the loom breathed evenly. Lan's mind drifted in its rhythm. Through the open doors she saw the slice of river that the lane granted them, gleaming. For a long time the rhythm was all she knew. Then the whistling began. At first it came like a thread between the other sounds, the barber scrubbing his basin, the market women calling light, insistent. It wasn't the temple flute she knew, nor the bamboo pipes. It had a brightness she could not place. She tried to ignore it. Then it came again, closer. A short chain of notes that resolved themselves into a smile. Aunt Thu's eyebrows shot up and disappeared under her kerchief. Offbeat whistling, she muttered. Only foreigners do that. Lan did not say, but not all. She had heard Vietnamese boys whistling too, though never with such absence of shame. She did not say, the last time a foreigner whistled down our lane, he left a measuring stick on our table and clucked at our loom like a man inspecting a horse. She only pressed the shuttle through, the skein crossing cleanly, until a shadow fell across the doorway. He was not like the engineers who sometimes tramped along the river with spools of wire and theodolites, nor like the men in crisp white suits drinking on the veranda of the new cafe near the Citadel gate. He wore a linen shirt rolled to his elbows, trousers dusted at the knees as if he had knelt to examine something, and around his neck, on a cord that looked improvised, hung a brass compass. He was tall enough to stoop to see beneath the lintel. When he saw the loom, he stopped whistling. Xin Chao, he said carefully, and his mouth made too much room for the words. He smiled as if the greeting were a triumph, and his eyes were the arrested blue of sky caught in a puddle. Is this? He glanced beyond Lan's shoulder at the peony border they had begun. Is this the cloud pattern of Huế I have read about? Who reads about our clouds? Aunt Thu said flatly. I do, he said, unabashed, and he tapped the pocket of his shirt where a notebook made a square bulge. Etienne Moreau, at your service. He made as if to bow, then thought better of it at the last second and simply inclined his head. I am a cartographer. He glanced toward the river, and his smile flickered. An engineer of maps, one might say. We are studying the currents and the load-bearing possibilities near Trường Tiền, the bridge, Aunt Thu said, like a woman testing a brittle thing. Always the bridge. Etienne's smile dimmed with the tact of a man who senses a word with barbs around it. It is the project of my superior, he said. I only draw the lines. Lines on paper can cut, Aunt Thu said. Lan wanted to apologize for her aunt, but she also wanted to defend the barbs. Instead, she lifted her palm to show him the dyed red on her fingertips. We draw lines too, she said. Ours do not cut. They only hold. On the contrary, he said, your lines hold entire worlds. His gaze went to the loom in a way that was not the way other men looked at her. He looked at the wood, at the threads, at the sheen of the border, and she felt a flicker of something like recognition. Not recognition of him, but recognition of devotions. He touched the compass absently. Your work is renowned. The peony in your district is the peony that makes court ladies sigh. Aunt Thu sniffed, but there was a hint of pleased surprise in it. Who told you that? The barber, he said, the one who has razors sharpened so well they could shave moss off a stone. He exaggerates, Aunt Thu said, though her posture straightened by a hair. Lan, she murmured, do not stop the loom because a foreigner admires it. The peony will not place itself. And she bent back to her heddle. Lan worked. She felt the stranger's eyes on the thread, not on her face, not on her neck where sweat dampened the wisps of hair. A barge passed on the river, and its song carried something about a wife waiting and a husband gambling away good rice. Etienne shifted his weight. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the notebook, and sketched as she worked, a quick hand that knew angles. When she glanced, she saw he had not drawn her exactly, nor the loom exactly, but the space between them, the proportions that made the thread sing. The paper looked like a small window, and in it her hands were precise, almost foreign. You are an engineer of grace, he said in French, softly, maybe to himself. Then he caught himself and said in his careful Vietnamese, Pardon, I mean beautiful work. Come on, she said. The noon heat came without mercy, as it always did in the season before full rain. Aunt Thu called a pause. Lan carried bowls to the table and scooped rice from the pot that had been steaming in the courtyard kitchen since morning, added stir-fried bean sprouts, and the small salted fish that her brother had caught with the net in the eddies near the east bank. She poured tea, the kind her father liked best, bitter first, then sweet. Eat, Monsieur Engineer of Maps, Aunt Thu said grudgingly, sliding a bowl forward. Your whistling has rattled the eaves, and therefore you must pay with appetite. That is a fair tax, he said, and gave a little bow, and did not take up the bowl until Lan and her aunt did. Lan had eaten with foreigners only twice, once as a little girl when her father delivered silk to the French resident's household, and a pale maid had handed her a biscuit with candied peel and scolded when she tried to pocket a second, and once at the pagoda, when the kind missionary woman gave soup to the poor with too much salt and nervous compassion. This was not like those. Etienne ate with careful greed, as if food were a secret to be learned and a joy not to be squandered. He did not show that he found the fish too salty, though he must have. He did not pretend the tea was perfect, though he praised its bitterness like medicine. When he finished, he did not lean his bowl back the way Lan's father did, but he set down his chopsticks with symmetrical precision, as if the table had become yet another of his maps, and he had drawn the proper borders. Do you believe in curses? He asked abruptly, when Aunt Thu rose to fetch more tea. Lan blinked. I believe in cause and effect. Then you would get along with the river, he said. It does not curse. It merely obeys its nature, swollen by rain or narrowed by drought. And yet there is an old man by the western bank who told me that if we put our iron over its water, it will eat our sleep. Our iron? Lan said, though she knew. You mean the bridge? He nodded. It will link this bank to that bank. Perhaps it will make traders' lives easier. Perhaps it will make your father's customers come from farther away. He hesitated. Perhaps it will anger others. He tapped his compass, then the notebook. My mother, back in Nancy, says There are two kinds of men: those who believe their lines tame the world, and those who believe their lines reveal how wild the world is. I am the second kind. I draw the river and its eddies. I do not command them. You are a careful man for one who whistles at strangers' doors, Lan said, more sharply than she intended. She wanted to bite the words back, but they lay already between them, bright as the scales of the fish in their bowls. He did not seem offended. He considered this as he would a new mapping problem. I whistle, he said, so that I do not fear what I do not know. Do you fear much? She asked, and the question surprised her. She had meant to silence him, not coax a confession. Yes, he said simply. When I was 12, I fell through a frozen lake. He smiled thinly. I do not like water that looks like stone. You came to the wrong city, she said, but gently this time. Here, the water looks like a poem pretending to be a road. It's saving. He laughed, startled, and then it was her turn to feel her face warm. Aunt Thu coughed in the corner precisely to remind them that she possessed ears and long memory. In the afternoon, the air pressed close as a hand on a mouth. The loom's song slowed. Etienne excused himself to return to the riverbank, to the square with the equipment and the men whose voices rose in staccato bursts in his language. Before he left, he asked, "May I return? I would like to learn how the peony becomes light, and," he glanced not at land but at the border in progress, "how a border holds a field." "If you bring coin," Aunt Thu said. "If you bring silence," Lan added. He put his hand to his chest as if swearing a small oath. "I can bring both." He returned the next day and the next. Sometimes he brought things of pencil that carved darker lines, a spool of thin thread slick as water. Sometimes he brought questions. How do you know when to change the angle of the silk? Why do you beat the weft more gently at the center? Which color bruises when it is impatient? His questions were the kind of questions only people who love things ask. She answered them carefully, not out of duty, but out of the pleasure of naming. "We change the angle when the eye grows tired," she said. "We beat gently at the center because the center of anything resents pressure. Red bruises if you do not speak to it first." He laughed when she said that, but not in mockery. He wrote it down in his small, dark script as if he wrote water, north, wind. When he was not there, she thought of him. She cursed herself for it and let the loom punish her back into devotion. But thoughts have a way of unspooling, of making their own threads. She found herself hearing his whistle as she reached for the pot of dye, imagining the lake of his childhood when she rinsed the skeins in the basin, picturing his mother of Nancy when she smoothed the hem of a skirt that a mother here would lift and appraise. Sometimes she watched the bridge's skeleton across the water, the pilings like teeth bitten into the current, the cranes, the men who looked like beetles crawling along the iron. The city hummed with speculation. The mandarins were against it except when they were not. The court ladies called it ugly, except when the wind lifted their hats and they laughed and said it would spare them muddy shoes. The traders calculated silently and predicted new fortunes. The river waited with the patience of something that is, in the end, indifferent. Her father watched, too. "I will not pretend I do not like it," he said one evening while mending a screen. "I am old enough that I like ideas that can be made real." "Mother liked ideas that could be imagined," Lan said. The words came unbidden. Her father paused. The mending needle lifted midair. He did not scold. "When two kinds of liking meet," he said, "the world makes children." That night, the moon was nearly full. Lanterns had begun to blossom on the river like flowers fallen upward. On evenings like this, girls her age would carry lotus-shaped lamps to the bank and let them go with murmured prayers. For a good husband, for a son, for the war in the hills to stay in the hills, for a fever to step around one's bed. Lan rarely went. She preferred to sew prayers into hymns where they would not be seen or burned. But her aunt shoved a lamp into her hands and a coin into her pocket. "Go," Aunt Thu said. "You sit so close to the loom you forget to see where the cloth will be worn." Lan went. The riverbank thrummed. The vendors shone like beetles in their lacquered trays, selling roasted yams and sticky rice wrapped in banana leaves. Children darted like minnows, their laughter thin, silver. A woman sang an old ballad that made Lan think of her mother's hands. Near the spot where the bridge's shadow would one day fall, men hammered stakes into the mud to mark some necessary border. Soldiers kept watch, their rifles like long-held breaths. Lan knelt and set her lamp on the water. It rocked, uncertain, then righted itself and drifted. She had not thought of a prayer. She opened her mouth and found one anyway. "For my father's knees," she whispered, "for my brothers not to be foolish, for my aunt to forgive herself for all the days when she did not laugh." She paused, and then, because the heart is a fabric with more than one weft, she added, "for my own heart to do the right thing, even if I cannot tell what it is." "Does the right thing know itself?" said a voice beside her, low, amused. She turned. Etienne crouched in the mud, his shoes already surrendering to it, his shirt untucked. He held a lamp that was plainly one he had bought a minute ago, too much coin in the vendor's eyes. He looked like any other man kneeling before the river, except that he did not. He had his compass out, as if he might chart the lamp's wayward course. "Your lamp will go crooked if you stare at it," she said. "Then I should shut my eyes and trust." "Or let it be what it is," she said. "The lamps do not know about your maps." He smiled, gently this time. "They are lucky." He set his lamp on the water, and it drifted into a cluster, then spun out. The small flames made a necklace across the current. "What did you ask for?" She hesitated. "Knees," she said finally. "Not mine." He nodded gravely. "I asked for a second childhood," he said, "the kind in which one could fall into a lake and come up laughing." "Is that possible?" she asked. "No," he said, "but perhaps the river will accept my ambition." They watched the lights. Her shoulder touched his. The contact was accidental, then deliberate in the way a breath is deliberate. She felt the heat of him through the thin cotton of her blouse. The river pulled. The iron skeleton of the bridge stood like the outline of a thought that had not yet decided if it would be kind. "Lan," he said, her name emerging into his French mouth like a foreign bird landing in an old tree. She heard then what she had kept herself from hearing, the want in it. It was not the greedy want of men who eyed her when she passed with a basket of skeins, nor the cautious want of mothers who saw in her good hands a reliable wife for their sons. It was a want that recognized her skill and wanted to live near it, a river wanting to run alongside a road. It terrified her. She stepped back. "I am engaged," she said. She had not meant to say it so baldly. It felt like a fishbone pushed through the skin. "To the son of Master Trun, Vin." "I know," he said. He did not flinch. "The barber told me. He tells me everything if I let him shave me for too long." She could not help a laugh, which annoyed her. "Then, why did you—" "I did not come to bargain," he said. "I came to learn your peony, And because when you lift the shuttle, the world seems to break and mend at once. He swallowed. And because a man can be many things, cartographer, fool, and still keep a secret prayer in his pocket. Prayers are not secret to rivers, she said. They listen for what we do not say. What do you not say? He asked. She held his gaze the way one holds a net before throwing it tight, alert. That sometimes I wish the loom were a boat, she said, and that I might cut it free. And he looked at the bridge skeleton, then at the river, then at her. Boats drift, he said, and sometimes drift back to where they began. Sometimes they do not, she said. Someone jostled them, a boy with too many lamps in his hands, and Land stepped forward to steady him. When she turned back, Etienne had that look again, a man measuring a current. May I ask you, he said, to teach me something I cannot learn from maps? She raised an eyebrow. How to see the stitch between two things and not always the seam, he said. Bring me something you cannot measure, she said. The smell of rain before it falls, he said promptly. She almost smiled. Come to the workshop tomorrow. Bring silence. He brought it. He sat without whistling for a full hour while she worked, and when he could not help it, he whistled so softly that only the dove in the rafters turned her head. He took off his compass and set it on the sill as if to disarm himself. He watched her feed the weft, watched the image grow, the peony's outer petals wide as a girl's palm, the inner ones tight as a kept secret. He closed his eyes when she asked him to and opened them when she said, now. He blinked and she saw his face change, something in his expression shifting like silt in a slow eddy. Do you see the difference? She asked. Here. She guided his finger without touching it toward the border where the thread's angle turned as the petal curved. From this to this. It is the difference between a petal that lies and a petal that breathes. He exhaled. I did not know the world could be improved by this much without anyone noticing. Everyone notices, she said. They just do not know where to look. He nodded, chastened, delighted. I would like to learn to look. She should have sent him away then. She should have said, take your desire for looking to the river and leave my house to its looms. But he had set his compass down, and something about that gesture, its small bravery, its admission that a man can be something else, swayed her. She did not send him away, and in not sending him away, she called to herself everything that would follow. The summer rains, the rumor her aunt would hear at the market, the mandarin's son's sudden, dangerous kindness, the night when the river broke its banks and remade their street into a canal of sorrow, the morning when the bridge shivered like a string and hummed a new note in the city's song. That afternoon, while Etienne traced petals in his notebook and Land's shuttle moved with the speed that comes as the hands forget themselves in skill, Master Trun's son arrived. He came with a servant to hold the gift basket, a lacquered box of candied soursop, and a fan painted with cranes. Vin himself was dressed in a dark silk dye, embroidered with crane's wings so pale the threads might have been rain, his hair coiled into a handsome knot. Beneath the scholar's hat he wore, not out of necessity but pedigree, his exam results had been respectable, not brilliant. His father's rank had made up the rest. He had a face that would photograph well. The new photographer near Dongba Market had declared a face that knew where to put its shadows. He stood in the doorway and did not remove his sandals. Ciao, he said. He glanced first at the loom, then at Land's hands, then, with the slight curl of a smile, at Etienne's compass on the sill. I see you entertain foreign curiosities. We sell silk, Aunt Thu said before Land could. Curiosity is the first coin of any trade. Vin inclined his head toward the ant, as one inclines toward a small altar whose deity one does not fear. He turned his smile to Lan. I came to offer, if you have not yet eaten the taste of soursop to sweeten your afternoon. He lifted the lacquered box and waited for her to pick it up. When she did, his fingers briefly touched hers. The touch was cool and calculated. Come on, Lan said. You are very kind. Kindness is just a way of placing one's name in someone else's mouth, Vin said with a chuckle that showed very white teeth. He stepped into the room as if there were no threshold. May I sit? You may, Aunt Thu said, less like a hostess than like a gatekeeper. She indicated the low stool near the end of the loom. Etienne had already stood, as if to surrender any claim he might ever have on a stool in this house, and retreated to the doorway. Vin's eyes followed him with an interest that was not curiosity so much as calculation. And you are a friend of the loom, Etienne said in Vietnamese. A man who admires borders. A rare thing, Vin said. Most men prefer to cross them. He smiled with a smoothness that did not disturb the surface of his face. But perhaps you are here to help with the bridge. A different border. I draw maps, Etienne said. He made the words plain, without pride or apology. Maps, Vin said, savoring the word like a sweet he was not sure he would swallow. Maps tell men where they are allowed to be and where they are not. Maps tell men where they are, Etienne said quietly. It is men who decide the rest. Vin's smile sharpened. A comforting fiction, he said. Lan, he turned as if suddenly and fully present for her alone. My mother wonders if you might consider sewing a second set of sleeves for the wedding hour tuck. She fears a stain. She fears many things. I have learned that fearing is a way for people like us to feel we can call the future to heal. He laughed again and leaned slightly forward. I do not fear much. Lan's aunt quirked an eyebrow. Then you must be very brave or very favored. Perhaps a little of both, Vin said. He glanced once more at the compass, and then at the petal Lan had just completed. He did not see the difference between the breathing and the lying petal. If you make the sleeves, my mother will sleep, and my father will say, Ah, the girl is dutiful, and I will be allowed to be pleased. Lan felt the 1,000 threads of expectation tug at her family, duty, a future with a tiled courtyard and tea poured into the expensive set she had seen once when her father delivered sets to Vin's house. She nodded. I will sew the sleeves, she said, her voice neither eager nor reluctant. Vin stood, as if the answer had lifted him. Good. He did not offer to pay. The sleeves would be paid for in a different currency, the currency of permission and status, and a father looking at her father with measured approval. I will return in 3 days. 2, Aunt Thu said, and Vin glanced at the older woman with a flicker of something like respect. 2, he agreed. His gaze flicked once to Etienne, then away, and as he left, he hummed not a whistle, but the clean edge of a song that men sing when they have never had to look down to place their feet. When he was gone, the house exhaled. Etienne did not come back into the workshop. He remained in the doorway watching the river with the posture of a man who has studied currents and does not trust them. Do not look as if you have lost a map, Lan said softly. I am remembering that maps tell me nothing about rooms like this, he said, equally soft. Rooms like this are drawn with different ink, Aunt Thu said crisply. Now, Lan, show me the petal again. And you, she did not look at Etienne. If you insist on being furniture, at least be silent furniture. She thumped the loom. Work forgets, so we must remember for it. They worked. The afternoon fell, and the blue hour slid into the alleys, into the palms of boys, into the white of the herons that lifted off the far bank. The first small wind of the season brushed the water. The bridge's iron sighed. The lamps, those that had not burned themselves down to cups of wax, strayed like thoughts a woman does not confess to her confessor. The next day brought rain. It started as a fine stitch in the air and thickened until it was a sheet. The city's roofs ran. The gutters gurgled like drunkards. The men at the river swore in several languages. Children cheered. Lan and her aunt covered the skeins that must not be wet and uncovered the skeins that must. Rain was a dye if you treated it with the respect due to any capricious god. By midday the doorway held a framed picture. A man in wet linen, hair plastered to his forehead, laughing. "I brought you something I cannot measure," Etienne said, and held up his palm, rain pooling. "The smell before it falls was not in my power, but the way it feels on the tongue." He stuck out his tongue like a boy, and Lan, despite herself, did the same. Rain tickled the taste buds. It tasted of iron from the invisible bridge, of clay from the hills, of something sweet like the memory of sugar cane. "You are ridiculous," Aunt Thu said, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. "Ridiculous men build bridges," he said cheerfully, and then lowered his voice. "Not always ones of iron. The river will decide if it wants yours," Lan said. "And you?" he asked. A mistake. He had let the pronoun slip from the river to her. A change of scale a cartographer should have known was perilous. "I am not a river," she said, more sharply than she intended. He flinched, and she regretted it. "I am a woman with a loom." "Those are the deepest rivers," he said, so softly she almost did not hear. The rain kept people indoors that day, and the city's stories shifted to indoor registers. Gossip fattened in kitchens. Secrets pressed themselves between the pages of ledgers. By evening, a rumor had found Aunt Thu, who, though wary, was not deaf. The rumor was small and sharp, that the mandarin's household had received a letter from a northern cousin whose son had returned with ideas that did not sit comfortably at tables with tea, that the court was more nervous than usual, that anyone too close to foreigners would find their invitations reduced. "You're a foreigner," Aunt Thu said, not kindly now, when Etienne had gone. "He is a good man and one who tastes rain. But good men make trouble they do not intend." "So do clever ones," Lan said, thinking of Vin's smile. "Yes," Aunt Thu said. "Clever men make trouble on purpose and call it art. Either way, women sweep it up." She softened an inch. "I know you did not ask for any of this, but we do not get to choose the winds that blow our roofs." Lan lay awake that night, listening to the rain drumming on the tiles, thinking of roofs and winds and bridges and looms, of ankles stepping across thresholds, of lips saying her name like a foreign bird, of her own hand reaching without touching, of the peony's living petal and lying petal. She thought of boats, boats that drifted, boats that moored, boats that tricked themselves into believing the river would always run the same. When dawn found her, it found her not rested but resolved in the way a woman is resolved by knowing there will be work. She rose, she tied her hair, she lifted the reed mat that protected the skeins. She did not expect to find beneath the mat a slip of paper sealed with wax. It was not the wax used by her father when he wished to remind himself of customers and bills. It bore the impression of a crane. She broke it with a fingernail. The letter was brief and formal, full of words that had learned how to bow. It conveyed the mandarin's pleasure at the progress of the wedding garments. It conveyed the hope that the sleeves would be completed in 2 days, as agreed. It conveyed, in a last line written in a different hand with a different ink, a request that Miss Land refrain from entertaining foreign visitors in the workshop until the wedding. "People talk," the line said. "People misunderstand." It would be unfortunate for talk to cast shadows. The line had been written by Vin. She knew before she reached the end of it, before she recognized the neat confidence of his script. People misunderstand. It would be unfortunate. These were correct words, words that believed themselves to be reasonable because they were balanced. They were also a command. Land stared at the letter until the swoop of the crane's wing on the wax blurred. She folded it once, then again, until it was no bigger than a thumb. She did not show it to her aunt. She slipped it into the sleeve of her blouse and went about the morning like any other morning, except that nothing was like any other morning. Etienne did not come that day. Perhaps the rain held him. Perhaps his supervisor called him to the river where the stakes had shifted in the night. Perhaps he had already heard what the barber would certainly have heard and told, his razor humming truths as it kissed a jaw. The absence was a presence. It sat on the bench where he had set his compass, on the window-sill where he had placed his notebook. It breathed. "Threads do not mind being watched," Aunt Thu said, businesslike. "They mind being unattended. Keep your foot steady." Land kept it steady. By noon the peony had a heart. In the late afternoon, the rain changed from sheet to knife, and then the knife dulled to a steady drum. Men on the riverbank untied ropes and tied them again. The city's gutters worked. Children invented new games in new puddles. A boy slipped and cut his knee, and his sister shouted, and their mother yanked him upright with the practiced fury of love. Vin returned at dusk, before the lamps were lit. He came alone this time, without a basket or a fan. He entered as if he had never been told about thresholds. He removed his sandals for the first time. "I have overstepped," he said without preface. Land's aunt blinked, thrown by the novelty of a man who announced his sin. "And here you are to step back?" "I am here to ask forgiveness for the letter," Vin said, his gaze steady on Lan's face. "I wrote in a way that men like me are taught to write. It was ungenerous. It smelled of ownership." "You are engaged," Aunt Thu said. "Ownership is half the smell of that word." "Perhaps," Vin said. "The other half should be mercy." He turned his hands palm up, a gesture close to vulnerability. "Lan, I will not pretend I do not like you. Any man would, and not only men who have the favor of their father's friends. You are more than some of my friends could manage. You deserve sleeves you sew for yourself." He laughed once without mirth. "But the world does not give us what we deserve. It gives us what it can bear. I am asking not because I fear gossip, though it can ruin people like my mother more efficiently than a flood ruins a floor, but because I want you to enter my house without debt, pressed into your palms, that you do not, for a while, teach foreigners to see peonies breathe." He swallowed. "If you tell me no, I will still marry you. I will still be a decent husband." Lan looked at him. He was beautiful in the way photographs would indeed love a face that would age into prestige. He was offering something like a choice, and not like a choice at once. She looked at her aunt, whose eyes were the eyes of a woman who had been young once, and had practiced the art of choosing the least damaging riverbank on which to build her house. She looked at the loom, the peony that was and was not yet what it would be. "Give me the evening," she said. "I will answer tomorrow." Vin nodded. He did not make the mistake of asking for her answer now. He understood some kinds of waiting. "Tomorrow," he said, and left. That night, the moon swam among ragged clouds. The rain paused, as if to listen. Lan took the little folded letter from her sleeve and set it on the sill where Etienne had set his compass. Then she blew out the lamp and lay down on her mat. She did not sleep. She listened to the river composing and erasing its notes. She thought of boats. She thought of peonies. She thought of bridges that might be cursed or might be being born. She thought of a boy with a scholar's hat who had learned how to be decent, and a man with a compass who had learned how to set it down. At dawn, the river left a gift. Lan found it when she went, as she did every morning, to lift the reed mat over the skeins. It lay in a wet footprint on the threshold, a small length of indigo silk tied with a knot. She recognized Etienne's clumsy fingers, had learned it from watching hers. The silk held a tiny sketch pinned with a fishbone, protected from the rain by a strip of oiled paper on the sketch, a peony bordered by a line that was not the cloud border and not any border she had been taught. It was a border that curved in on itself and out again, making room without ceding ground, a line that said, "There is a way to hold and to let go." No words, only the drawing, only the silk, dyed in the shade she had shown him and thought he had not noticed how she guarded. She did not know if he had left it in the rain or if the river had reached to touch it after he laid it down. She did not know what it asked of her. She only knew that her heart understood its grammar. She held the drawing until she felt the steadiness of the curve in her palm, then tucked it into her blouse. She turned to the loom and began the day's work. When her aunt came in, she did not see the drawing, or pretended not to. She adjusted the heddle with her customary briskness. "Today," Aunt Thu said, as if nothing in the world had changed and everything had, "we will teach the cloud to behave." Lan nodded. Outside, the river's skin shivered in the new wind. The skeleton of the bridge caught the light like a net. Somewhere a barber sharpened his razor and balanced two truths side by side, and somewhere Vin waited for an answer he believed he could endure. Etienne, wherever he stood, possibly at the water's edge or in the square, lifted his eyes to the sky as if maps had taught him to do that much. In the workshop, the shuttle whispered. The peony's next petal learned how to breathe. And the city, strung between iron and prayer, drew a breath of its own. It would not release until everything that needed to break had broken, and everything that could be mended had learned the stitch. Chapter 2. Currents and Vows. The morning broke with a pale, hard light, the kind that sharpened the edges of tile and leaf and rumor. Lan held the little sketch. Etienne had left its curve a question, its curve an answer, and felt the hush before a loom begins, before a decision throws its first thread. She tucked the drawing into the inner fold of her audai, where mothers hide money for market and girls hide words for later. In the courtyard, the jar of rainwater her mother had loved showed a skin ruffled by the first small wind. The river was already speaking in a lower register. When Lan opened the workshop doors, the air carried more earth than sky. "Storm River," Aunt Thu said, glancing at the slice of water visible at the end of the lane. She tapped the loom's breastbeam as if waking an old friend. "We will get the sleeves finished before it raises its voice." Lan set her foot to the treadle. The shuttle leapt. Thread met thread and made surface, made promise. Beneath her palm, the silk behaved and misbehaved the way living things do. She found herself, against intention, altering the border by a hair, a concession to the curve in Etienne's drawing that was not any border she had been taught. It was not betrayal. It was accommodation. like shifting a bowl a finger's width so a guest need not reach. Before noon, Vin arrived. He did not bring sweets or fans or the lacquer box that announced a man's education in the courtesies of transaction. He brought a yellowed paper folded into the geometry of officialness and a look on his face that leveled itself into courtesy only when he saw her. "Thuako," he said, bowing to Aunt Thu first for the first time since he had come to their house, a small adjustment, like moving the bowl. "May I speak with Lan?" "You may, in the presence of the loom," Aunt Thu said dryly. "If you wish to speak without witnesses, choose another house." Vin accepted the terms. He took the low stool and sat as if giving honor to the wood. The rain began a delicate tapping along the eaves. Lan kept the shuttle moving. He waited until the line she was laying came to its natural pause, and then spoke. "I thought last night that I wanted an answer I would like," he said. "This morning I understood that what I need is an answer I can live with." "Those are sometimes the same," said Aunt Thu, skeptical. "Not for men raised to enjoy more than they can carry," Vin said, and for the first time the arrow of his wit turned inward. He set the paper on the sill without opening it. "My father asked me to bring you the formal day for the wedding mid-autumn, though of course the court's calendar means the moon must agree. He also asked me to tell you that the sleeves are not a test of obedience. They are a test of steadiness," Lan said. "They are a test of whether, in a house like mine, a woman can move a bowl a finger's width and not be slapped." Vin said. He looked at her without the lacquer of charm. "I am asking you marry me as one woman marries another, both of us married to a thing larger than either of us. You to your loom, I to the idea of myself. I was raised to polish like a brass gong. I will not ask you to nail your doors shut. I will ask only this, that you do not let strangers teach me what my wife loves." The rain thickened. Lan lifted her eyes from the weft. "People will teach themselves that, no matter where I put my doors," she said. "Yes," he said, "but I can choose what I learn first." He smiled without weaponry. "I have been a decent man because the world rewards it. I would like to be a good one because I am afraid of what happens if I am not." Aunt Thu's eyebrows softened by a hair's breadth. "Fear is a thread, too. Woven well, it is strength. Woven poorly, it is rope." Vin nodded. "Give me a place to begin that is not just a place my father showed me." The river made a sound then that was not like a voice but had grammar. A drum thudded from the direction of the pagoda. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats, warning, water. The street outside brightened with sudden reflections. A boy ran by bare-chested, shouting something about boats untied. "Later," Lan said to Vin, and did not ask permission of anyone to end the conversation. "Tie the skeins high," she said to her aunt, and reached for the reed mat. They moved like women who have rehearsed disaster. The dye pots were lidded and pulled to higher shelves. The brood hen was coaxed under the stair. The silk for Madame Fung's daughter's skirt, a sea of red and gold, was already wrapped in oiled paper and fitted into the cedar chest their mother had filled a lifetime ago with a different kind of trousseau. Vin stood with his hands empty for a heartbeat too long. Men from his houses did not move chests. Men around him did. And then he bent without being asked, lifted and swore softly, as if rediscovering the existence of weight. By the time the first sheet of water slid under the door, the lower shelves were mostly clear. The river had shortened its negotiations. It came like a man who had decided what he wanted and trusted the force of himself to persuade. "Boys!" Lan's father limped into the workshop from the back, hair dark with rain. "Get to the rafters what cannot swim." His left knee refused authority. He put his hand to the loom as if it were a shoulder, and his face, usually a field plowed by patience, startled into worry. "The big one?" he asked. The big one, the grandmother's loom, could be dismantled, but not quickly. It was a boat and a house both. It had lasted through women and wars. Lan touched its beam, felt the pulse of the wood under the skin of age. She thought of memories that are creases in silk and do not lift no matter how you steam them. She thought of the peony's breathing petal. "Take the warp off," she said. "We save the threads. If the frame must drink, it will drink. It's C-X-Ac." Veen looked at her with the sudden comprehension of a man watching a queen choose which pieces to sacrifice. He set his hands to the pegs she indicated. "Show me," he said simply. They worked, feet in water, skirts gathered, bodies learning each other's boundaries by necessity rather than flirtation. The water rose to ankles, to calves. In the lane, men shouted, wood knocked wood, a dog yelped and found a higher world on someone's table. The drum changed its cadence. A woman sobbed, not for a person but for a pig. The city, strung between iron and prayer, groaned. "Boat!" A voice called from the mouth of the lane. Lan looked up. Etienne stood there, waist deep, shirt clinging, hair plastered. His compass hung around his neck like a small promise. Behind him, a flat-bottomed boat nosed down the lane, steered by a man with a pole who could have been anyone's uncle. Etienne held the rope like a man who had learned to fear water and returned to it as one returns to an old wound to test its tenderness. "I charted the high courtyards yesterday," he called in Vietnamese over the water's new nouns. "The pagoda's porch is dry. We can ferry the old and the young onward by." "You will not be able to ferry pride," Aunt Thu snapped, half to the river, half to male bodies in general, but she nodded to the old man next door, whose wife had not walked in a year, and waved the boat forward. "Take Mrs. Bao first," she said to Etienne, and did not add, "You taste rain, you bring rope, now be useful." "I will come back for you," Etienne said to Lan, only to be met by a look from Vin that would, in a different world, have been the opening stroke of a duel. "You will come back for the loom," Lan said, "because choosing a pronoun too early is the beginning of a war." The water crept to their knees. They lifted the warp free, a glistening net of possibility, and hung it from the rafters like the skin of a dragon. Lan counted breaths, not prayers, not drum beats, but the rhythm that keeps a body from panicking. In the back room, her brothers shouted over whose bundle was more necessary. "None of them," her father snapped, then softened, and gave each a thing he knew mattered, only because boys are boys. One a carved whistle, the other a slingshot. Etienne returned. The boat banged against the doorframe, then backed, then nosed again. The man with the pole swore with the artistry of a poet and a fisherman. "2 trips at least," Etienne said. "3 if the water keeps lying about being polite." "Father," Lan said, and her father, who had already put his hands on the loom as if hands could hold a house against a river, nodded and stepped into surrender. He climbed awkwardly into the boat with the gracelessness of dignity soaked. The boat took him, and an old neighbor clutched the gunwale and breathed as if through a straw. The river made small jokes with leaves and sticks and important things. "Go with them," Vin said to Lan. "No," she said. "You cannot out-stubborn water," he said. "I can," she said, "if what I am being stubborn about is not the water." She gestured at the smaller loom, at a stack of bolts not yet paid for, at the chest with a wedding skirt wrapped like a sleeping child. "Take what can be carried and is owed to someone else." Leave what is memory. Memory floats or sinks as it chooses. Vin looked as if he might argue. Then he did not. He bent and lifted the chest as if accepting that a man's back sometimes has the last word when his mouth has too many. I will send men from our house to help if the bridge. He swallowed the words. In the street, a crate swept past with someone's onions. Etienne touched his arm as one soldier touches another in the dark. There is a side passage, he said. Less current. They moved as if they had been taught by the same mother. The second trip took Aunt Thu and the chest and the brood hen, who hated the box into which she had been presented to fate. Do not be gallant, Aunt Thu said to Etienne, as if scolding a nephew. Be exact. I will try to be both, he said, and for a moment the corner of her mouth admitted a treaty. By the time the boat nosed back a third time, the water was at Land's thighs, and the loom had decided to learn to float the way old queens learn to dance to new music without admitting they are dancing. The window, which had once framed a river like a painting, now framed a river that had eaten the painting and come into the room to discuss its terms. Go, Etienne said. Please. Lan shook her head. I will not let the loom kick and drown. It will not, he said, and he stepped into the room and put his hands where her father's had been, on the old wood, on the history. His eyes were the exact color of a northern sky, dragged south and wet. I know something about bodies that panic in water, he said. They are not helped by love. They are helped by leverage. Love is a kind of lever, she said, because what else can a woman do when the river is in her house but argue for metaphor? He smiled. Even then, together they wedged the loom's legs against the weight of the table that had held the dye pots, then wedged the table against the pillar, then wedged the pillar against the stubbornness of the house that had been built by people who knew both rivers and marriage. They tied rope to wood, wood to beam, hope to hope. The loom settled, indignant, lifted slightly, then settled again in a position like an old ox, deciding it will not go farther. Now, Etienne said. Now I go, Lan said. They stepped into the boat, and the boat stepped into the lane. The world had grown deeper. The barber's razor sign floated oddly, cutting nothing. A child waved from a shutter-sill, king of a small island. On the river, real boats battled for new routes, like fish discovering a different set of rocks. The bridge's iron sang a note too low for those on the banks to hear, unless fear had tuned their ears. At the pagoda porch, women pressed against women, children pressed into the shape of women's shadows, men stood in that particular sideways way of men who wish to help without admitting they do not always know how. The head nun held a ledger and a ladle and wielded both with grace. The monk, with a gentle cough, the one who had chased a dog out of the courtyard with more kindness than dogs, usually Warrant handed out cups of ginger tea by the dozen and broke up an argument over whether a bundle was better placed near the east or the west pillar, with a story about pillars that listened to only one wind and fell. Lan found her father sitting with his knee wrapped and his pride temporarily unmoored. She tucked a dry cloth under his heel and said nothing that would make the cloth wet. Aunt Thu took stock with her eyes, the way women count in disasters. Who has all children? Who has lost a cup? Who has lost a room? The brood hen harumphed and settled, and in doing so assured an old neighbor that small domestic rhythms will always survive tyrants and weather. Vin arrived with 2 men and the cedar chest set high, and for a moment just long enough to bend even an ant's prejudice, he looked like a man who carried not privilege but purpose. He set the chest down before he set himself down and closed his eyes as if asking forgiveness from a god he did not usually employ. When he opened them, they went first to Lan. "I sent 4 boys to help at your door," he said. "They will guard what can be guarded." "Thank you," she said. It was not a word she gave men in his position easily. She was always careful to distinguish between duty and kindness. Today there was no time for distinctions sharper than a rope. Etienne leaned his back against a pillar, compass tucked away, and used his hands to show 3 fishermen a path across the wide, slow current, now covering what had been the rice seller's morning floor. He moved his fingers in small arcs, the map of a street now made into a canal. They watched his hands as if they were his mouth. Every few breaths he looked at the bridge, not with the pride of a builder, but with the appraisal of a man measuring the temper of a young bull. It held. It hummed. It was learning to be the thing it had promised to be. The rain slowed, then stopped as suddenly as laughter checks itself at a funeral. The water did not recede with equal courtesy. It lingered, club-footed and sulky, testing stair treads and thresholds, finding new eddies and liking them too much. The pagoda porch steamed with the smell of wet humanity, ginger, fear, pond. Night came while everyone was still doing day work. Around the 2nd hour of the lanterns, the hour when people begin to pretend the evening might be edible, someone shouted from the direction of the bridge. Heads turned as one body. A ragged line of men appeared along the near bank, laborers from the iron skeleton. A foreman with a face like a hewn plank, a boy too young to be there, a man with a sleeve tied over a bleeding arm. A section of scaffolding had twisted. The rumor that outran the truth gave names to the planks. The men shouted for rope, for quiet, for a blessing. The bridge had not fallen. The bridge had been rebuked. Etienne was already moving before the words formed in Vietnamese. He didn't ask permission. He ran, then waited, then swam. His body at home in fear in a way a man becomes at home with the thing he rehearses. "Do not be a hero," Aunt Thu said. "Too late and not to the right man." She looked at Lan. "Go. He is your trouble. Go and make it smaller." Lan went. Vin moved too. The city had taught him that some storms are good theaters and some are work. He chose work. Together they found themselves on the bank near the first broken ladder. Etienne's face was white in a way that showed no fear, and all of it, he slapped a plank, swore, laughed once, and put his shoulder where a shoulder looked useless and made it necessary. It was not a dramatic rescue. It was 100 small moves that turned a terrible thing into an almost a rope, threaded where no rope wanted to go. A boy who had never tied a knot right, tied one right. A man who had always thought his job was to order other men put his hands on iron and learned what river iron bite felt like. A woman held a lantern steadily and did not tremble, even when the night pressed close, and the bridge sang an uncertain note. When the last man came off the scaffolding with his dignity mostly intact and his life fully so, the foreman took off his hat, held it against his chest, and said something in his own language that meant we should not have needed our luck. Etienne, dripping and shaking and laughing, the way men laugh when the lake spits them back out, turned toward Lan as if to borrow a breath. Vin offered him a cloth without looking at him, an action more intimate than any argument. "Thank you," Etienne said. "You will pay for this by not dying stupidly another time," Vin said. "I will try," Etienne said, and for the first time since the lake of his boyhood, he believed it might be possible. They walked back to the pagoda porch, 3 bodies making a grammar, and sat with their knees almost touching and almost not. The head nun handed them bowls of congee, in which there were mystery greens and the memory of meat. The monk with the gentle cough told them a joke about a fish who did not know he was in water until he was invited to a wedding in a house on a hill. They laughed as if laughter were a stretch, a way to keep the muscles warm. By morning, the river loosened its mouth. The lane showed stones again. The barber's sign cut the air as it should. The hen announced the world's continued availability for eggs. The bridge, scarred, stood. A man had lost 2 fingers. A boy had learned he could do more than watch. The city had learned yet again that it is possible to hold and to be held at once. Lan went home to a room that smelled like river and patience. The loom was a wet throne, affronted but upright. The warp dripped a rhythm onto the floor that would be a stain later and a story now. The cedar chest had returned with Vin's men and sat dry as a bone on a shelf that had never held anything as valuable as a thing owed to someone else. In the doorway, the sketch of the border she had tucked into her blouse had bled a little ink where her skin had warmed it. Her father slept, mouth open, the way exhausted men paid debt to their bodies. Aunt Thu wrung her skirt, wrung it again, and said, "We will need new reeds." Lan nodded. Then she turned to Vin and to Etienne, who stood, uncertain of whether they were visitors or furniture, and said, "You both came when the water did. That is a thing I will not forget. Do not make gratitude into a chain." Aunt Thu murmured, "I will not," Lan said, and looked at Vin. "You asked for an answer. I will give you one with terms. If we marry, you will not forbid those whose eyes love what I love to sit in my workshop and learn the names of breaths. You will stand between me and your father when his fear dresses itself in etiquette. You will let me sew the border I choose on the sleeves your mother will worry over. You will remember that to marry a woman with a loom is to marry the river she drinks from and the banks that keep her from drowning." Veen looked at her and saw all the maps of himself tremble, and then right themselves. "Yes," he said. He did not embroider it. He did not bargain. "Yes," he said again, and looked at the loom as if making a pact with an ancestor. "And you," Lan said, turning to Etienne, "if you stay, you will not ask me to go where I cannot breathe. If you go, you will not take my skin with you." "I have never been given anyone's skin," he said. "I have borrowed glimpses. I can return those easily." He took the compass from his neck and closed it, the way a man shuts a door quietly when leaving a room he loves. "I am being sent to the Delta when the waters permit travel," he said, a sentence that tried and failed to be casual. "There are currents there that do not forgive draftsmen who draw them wrong. I would like to say goodbye before I go, properly." Without the water shouting, Lan felt the tug, the honest ache of what cannot be both. She had not expected life to offer her tragedy that was operatic. She had expected tragedy that was domestic. What she felt was neither, and both an ache that would become a line woven so deep that no one would see it but she would feel it when the cloth moved. "Goodbye is a kind of border," she said. "We will choose where to place it." "On the bridge," he said, with a flicker of mischief that was also sorrow, "before it forgets who hummed to it first. To Cation Sech, and I, hey old too dismas for all." The city dried the way cities do, with 1,000 hands and 1,000 small resignations and 1,000 small joys, when a spoon is found under a chair and a toy boat floats on a puddle, just long enough to prove the world still likes children. Vin sent men to mend the broken panel in Lan's door, and did not make a show of paying them well. He sat with her father, and learned how to oil a treadle and how not to talk when a man is describing a wife who is dead as if she is overhearing him from the roof. Aunt Thu resented his competence and then grudgingly respected his ability to accept correction without turning correction into a stage. Etienne spent his mornings on the river with men who knew more than his teachers, and his evenings standing in the workshop doorway, holding his whistling in his mouth like a marble so it would not escape. He made a map of the flood's path that was not for his supervisor, but for land's shelf. He drew it with delicate ink, the kind that takes and then gives a palimpsest of streets and eddies, of thresholds that had held and thresholds that had not. In one corner he left a curve that was not street, not river. It was her border. He did not write her name. He did not need to. On the first clear night, when lanterns burned long and the vendors dared to sell sweets that would not get wet before they were eaten, Lan walked with Vin to the riverbank. Children launched boats made from banana leaves. Someone played a two-string danit and managed to make hope and loss share a cup. The iron of the bridge, forgiven by the river, at least for now, held men and women as they leaned their elbows on its new rail and invented a view they would tell themselves was timeless. In the mid-span, where even the bold feel a tremor, a man and a woman paused. Etienne waited there, hat in hand like a man at a threshold. He looked at Lan, then at Vin, and nodded as if greeting a single creature with two shadows. Vin nodded back with a small smile that had learned to be smaller. They stood so that no one else thought them remarkable. People are busy on bridges with their own metaphors. I brought you a thing that does not belong on a map, Etienne said. He handed Lan a small, wrapped bundle. Inside was a scrap of old French canvas that had been many things: sail, tent, arrogant mistake, and was now a clean surface. On it, with a brush that must have been finer than any she owned, he had painted her border in ink, mixed with something that caught a hint of moon, the line that curved to make room and curved again to remind the room of its shape. Beneath it, in the smallest letters, he had written in Vietnamese not the word goodbye, but the word later. Later, she said, and did not promise it. Promises have weight. Later is a string tied to a wrist, so a lantern will not float away too far too fast. They leaned on the rail and watched the river decide how it would carry the moon that night. Vin, who could not help but be the kind of man who sees the politics in beauty, said quietly, "We make new things, and then we must live with having made them." He touched the rail. "This will carry women who never before looked at that bank as anything but a danger. It will carry a mother to a child who married past a fairy's patience. It will carry a stupid boy away from his good job. It will carry a clever man to trouble. It will carry silk meant for sleeves that will not be stained because there is now this." He lifted his hand as if to introduce them to the bridge and the bridge to them. "Some of it will break," Etienne said. "Some of it should," Lan said. "Some of it has been waiting to break politely for years." They were silent then, the way people are silent when speech would be like more river poured into a river. Around them, the city rehearsed being itself. A girl lost her shoe and did not cry because she found she liked the feeling of wood under one bare foot and leather under the other. An old man said the same line about the old days he said every night, and no one listened and no one would have let him not say it. A soldier walked by with his rifle angled in a way that suggested the rifle might be as tired of him as he was of it. When they parted, it was with hands not held, and with a set of permissions that would look to outsiders like ordinary life, and to those involved like a treaty made with care. Etienne went to the side of the bridge where his men waited, where his supervisor would not scold him because the supervisor was elsewhere, learning that tricks of paper do not impress a river. Vin walked with Lan back to the bank, where the vendors were already bargaining as if nothing had ever drowned. "Your sleeves," he said, as if one can turn a page and have it be a new book. "My sleeves," she said. "Our sleeves." She did not say whose arms would go into them. That is what sleeves are for, to be worn by a life that fills them with a shape not anticipated by the seamstress. The weeks that followed were made of work and its particular pleasures. Silk dries the way grief does, unevenly, with moments of softness that surprise and moments of stiffness that must be steamed out with patience and heat. The wedding robe grew on the loom like a field grows under the sun when the farmer finally sleeps. The peonies opened and breathed. None of them lied. The new border, invented by a river and a drawing, and a woman's refusal to let a pronoun pull the roof down, curved and held, curved and released. It made the sleeves look as if a bride could lift her arms and find that space had been made for them without any man having to step backward. 2 days before mid-autumn, the mandarin's wife came to the workshop, preceded by a scent that had to be described not as perfume but as a woman's intention. She wore a silk the color of coconut flesh and hair that had never been asked to learn humility. She tapped the floor with the toe of her shoe as if measuring the room. "Show me," she said. Lan showed her. She did not bow more than the cloth demanded. She did not explain what could be seen without words. The mandarin's wife, who had learned to understand things with her fingers even when she decided not to say so with her mouth, touched the border once, twice, and then pretended she had not touched it at all. "It is new," she said. "It is respectful," Lan said, and looked at the woman's wrist where a vein fluttered like a small fish trapped and impatient. "It is made to let a woman move where she must." The mandarin's wife lifted her chin. Respect had been offered without servility. She nodded. "My husband will think it is a cloud," she said. "He is used to naming things." She leaned forward an inch. "He is not always wrong." "I am not always right," Lan said, and the two women smiled the private smile of women who know what the river does to houses and men and mornings. On the morning of the wedding, the city smelled of mango leaves and oil and incense, and the brief terror of boys who had been given tasks that involved flame. The sky pretended not to remember the flood. The bridge wore its new paint with the false modesty of a handsome woman asked to describe herself. Vin stood in a courtyard crowded with expectation, his Audi's cranes ready to take off. He looked like a man about to become a photograph. Lan stood in the small room where the bride was being made into the kind of woman who can enter a house and make it think it has always expected her. Madame Fung's daughter trembled like a water bowl touched by a breath. Lan sewed the last stitch with the steadiness of a woman who has lifted a loom against a river and won. She whispered a prayer into the hem, not for a son, not for a docile mother-in-law, not for money, for room. When the bride raised her arms to be dressed, the sleeves held what they promised. Her shoulders had space. Her breath did not catch on the border. In the courtyard, when the gongs answered each other like old brothers, when the men with their trays of tea performed their choreography with the gravity of priests, when the neighbors assessed and the children made their own opinions the way children do by stealing a sweet and running, Lan stood toward the back and felt the peonies breathe and felt her own lungs find that the room they needed existed even when no one announced it. Vin found her after the last bow of the long series of bows that had been a road and a dance. He took her aside, not into shade, not into a corner, but to the edge of the courtyard where the air moved. "Today," he said, "I learned I can be a son and a husband without being the floor between them." He looked at her, eyes unarmed. "Do you still choose me?" "I choose the version of you that understood that sentence," she said. "And I choose my loom, and I choose my aunt's way of saying yes with a frown, and I choose the border that lets us lift our arms." He smiled, and it was not the smile men practice. It was a man's face when he has been permitted to be not only a man, but this man. "Then let us be boring in the best way," he said. "Let us be the house that does not wash away." "Boring is a blessing," she said. "Boring is a floor." Yes. They married at the end of the season of rain with a ceremony that pleased those it needed to please and did not waste time trying to please the rest. The gifts were sensible. The envy was manageable. The monk with the gentle cough blessed their floorboards and did not pretend to know the future. The head nun ate a sweet and allowed herself a second. On the day Etienne left for the Delta, he came to the workshop dressed not like a man leaving, but like a man visiting. He did not take the compass from his neck. He did not bring the notebook. He brought himself and a mispronounced greeting and hands that had learned to stand still in rooms that did not belong to him. He offered a small wrapped packet to Aunt Thursday for the read, he said, from a man who broke one by leaning on it when he should not have. "It is good to pay for one's education," she said, not unkind now. He turned to Lan. He did not ask to speak alone. The workshop was the right witness. "In a place where men measure and then name," he said carefully in Vietnamese that had learned to know when it was insufficient, "I did not know how to say that my lines were never meant to be fences." He touched the frame of the big loom. "I learned where the border breathes. I will take that and draw it across places that did not ask for it. Perhaps only on my own paper. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it will keep me from drowning in a different water." "You will drown and rise and drown again," she said. "That is what you are for." "And you?" he said. "I am for catching the cloth before it lies," she said. They looked at each other, not with hunger, but with the gentleness that comes after hunger has been honored and told to sit. He took her hand not to keep it, but to know it, and then let it go with a care that was itself a kind of map. He bowed to the loom. He bowed to the ant. He bowed to the jar of rainwater as if it were a shrine. He left. Lan watched him walk down the lane toward the river that had insisted on being in every story. She did not weep. The river had taught her that tears are not the only salt needed to make broth. She turned back to the loom, to the shuttle, to the work that would be necessary whether or not a clever man crossed her threshold and held his whistling in his teeth like a coin. In the evenings afterward, when the air smelled of mango leaves and the bridge learned the footstep of the city the way a man learns to love the sound of his house settling, she and Vin walked to the mid-span and leaned on the rail. They did not perform their love for people who measured such things. They stood and let the river be what it was. Sometimes Vin pointed at a boat and named its cargo with the confidence of a man whose guesses had always been rewarded. Sometimes he guessed wrong and laughed. Sometimes he was silent, and that, too, was a difference. On the first mid-autumn after their marriage, the lamps blossomed on the water again. Lan set one with a prayer not for anything but for the continued availability of the right words when a choice looks like a seam. Her lamp drifted, righted itself, found a current she liked, and went. Nearby, a young woman lifted her arms to adjust a sleeve and smiled when it did not catch. At home, When the house was quiet and the river had lured the city into forgiving it for a while, Lan took out the canvas Etienne had painted and hung it above the loom. The border her border curved and held, it was nothing, and it was everything. It was only ink. It was the difference between a petal that lies and a petal that breathes. It was a woman, between iron and prayer, choosing where to make room and where to make a wall. When the shuttle whispered, and the thread laid itself down like a promise only the wearer would feel, she thought of all the maps men draw, and all the borders women mend, and of a river that takes and gives, and sometimes returns what it took much later, with an apology shaped like driftwood. She thought of knees that did not hurt that week. She thought of a boy who had learned to tie a knot. She thought of an old loom that had been asked to float, and had decided to be a boat for a day so it could go on being a loom for years. In Huế, where lanterns over the Perfume River teach the city night after night how light looks when it agrees to be carried, people said that the bridge had changed their lives. They were right and wrong. The bridge had given them new ways to arrive. The border on Lan's sleeves had taught them, very quietly, how to lift their arms when they arrived. And in a workshop that smelled sometimes of rain and sometimes of dye and always of patience, a woman moved the bowl a finger's width, and the room admitted it had been waiting for that space.